It's down to my shoulders now.
Well, I mean, you obviously like they can't see, but you got like a little bun in the back, like a nice proper bun.
Mm-hmm. You haven't seen me too much over the past 2 months because I've been traveling, but it's probably been in a bun since April, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gone 3 weeks to Texas, so.
Right. Well, I mean, the audience doesn't really know. Perhaps we're giving away our secrets, but there have been points where we have like mass recorded episodes because Connor's work schedule has been like that insane.
Mm-hmm.
I think one time you were gone for pretty much an entire month.
A month and a half I was gone.
Yeah. So we literally took an entire day and just mass recorded a lot of, which were fun, by the way. Well, one of them wasn't very fun, but most of them were fun, pretty easygoing. So this is actually the first time that we've been back in the studio.
Mm-hmm.
It's been like probably a solid 2.5 months.
Yeah, I think our last one was probably mid or end of March. I think was the last in studio. And I think we had a guest here as well, if I remember correctly.
Actually, no, because it was a different. That must have been before.
Okay, maybe I'm remembering wrong, but it's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a while, so it's good to be back.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sad that I had to do my last episode without you.
You did just fine.
My throat was dead, like absolutely dead. But we actually have an interesting topic that isn't getting a lot of coverage, and I think that it should. And you brought it up to me when we were just discussing what we were gonna just talk about today.
Yeah, and I mean, I brought it up because I've got a liberal friend who was asking me questions, and he's like, "Hey, did you know that Republicans in states are just keep trying to like lower or just obliterate like the minimum age requirement for marriage?" And I was like, who, what, and where and when? I was like, find me an article. So he found me some, and I started looking into it. And it's like, yeah, they've introduced bills over the last couple of years, marriage laws, but each one of those marriage laws that they would introduce would essentially lower or just remove minimum age requirements for states and marriages. And some of them were even just negating parental consent. And so I was like, well, of course I take issue with this. Just because there's a Republican approval stamped on the bill does not mean that I agree with this at all. So I brought it up to Jordan. Was like, we should talk about this because they're not getting talked about, and I think they should have some negative publicity.
I agree with that, because as you were kind of talking to me about it, and I started doing some research myself, if this is something that comes to light, which I think it should, by the way, I'm not tribal, I think it should come to light. Mm-hmm. If you have all these Republicans that are like, rah-rah against transing the kids, which is good, I'm about it, I think it's great. There should be as well some sort of talk about what's going on with these child marriage bills and situations. And to be completely fair, we don't know the Republicans that are open about not transing the kids. I don't know what all their statements are on child marriage, so I'm not going to 100% put that on them.
I know there was one in there that I read about in an article, and it might have been Tennessee, but they had introduced a bill, basically against kids being able to transition, but then like a year or two prior had voted in or made a bill that
I think
basically brought it to like age 15, I think.
Yeah.
I might be wrong, but it was just under 16 is what I remember. So it was, they contradict.
Yeah. And it was interesting. I was reading another article, and this was a Yahoo article, but there is video. There is video of it, so I think we're in good shape here. There was a Missouri state senator who approved a bill to block gender-affirming care. Mm-hmm. Good stuff. Okay. But voted against a bill that would, ban child marriage. And I think he was kind of confronted about this, and I don't know if he took it very well. According to the video, he said, quote, "Do you know any kids who have been married at age 12? I do, and guess what? They're still married."
Okay. Yeah. No, it was this guy. It
Yeah,
wasn't. It wasn't
was
Tennessee.
yeah.
Tennessee, I think, did do something, but maybe not as egregious as saying
Right.
12-year-olds can get married and they'll be happy.
Yeah, well, this is part of my point though, is that the Republican Party does a bad job at being united. I feel like this is a pretty united front where like everyone should be on the same page about, because if you think about like a 12-year-old or even a 16-year-old, there are some of us who think very naively that, okay, I understand like kind of a Romeo Juliet type situation. She's 16, he's 18.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, where's the line? That can be discussed to a certain extent, but the cases that you have people. I think it's mostly men. I was looking at some of the statistics on that. Is that most of the child marriages are little girls.
Yeah.
Not as many boys, but it still happens. And these are, middle-aged men. This is not like, Stevie and Jessica, Jessica's 16, Stevie's 18, they fell in love, she was a junior, he's a senior, whatever, like that. You're looking at a much more predatory situation.
Yeah. I mean, virtually, it's like it's legalizing predators to marry kids. Like, I'm sorry, the kids are not old enough to be making that kind of decision.
They're not.
They just aren't. And so if there's any Republican out there that's saying, no, the kids are not old enough to understand the consequences of having a sex change or taking hormone therapy for their gender, I'm sorry, but you are in a complete contradiction. Actually, right. I'm not sorry. You're an idiot. And they're in complete contradiction if they think that, a 12, 15-year-old can get married and understand what all of that means.
Right.
Or how to handle it. Right.
Yeah, you have to be consistent on that front. And if you're not consistent, it's another thing for the left to poke at us. And it's kind of shameful where, you're on the Democrats' side here for these senates. It looks like these are state senates, as far as I can tell. Mm-hmm. So you have, and what I have noticed too, at least in North Carolina, I was talking to someone who will remain unnamed, but he is in the Senate in North Carolina, where he was just kind of talking like, yeah, you can talk to the Democrats, like it's not like this horrible, like it's not quite as fantastic as what you see between those in like the I call it the big house, the big house,
the front
the big
lines,
House of Representatives, the big Senate, things like that. But it is kind of sad that you have the Democrats, where I'm like fully on board with what they're saying mm-hmm. here, completely on board. I'm kind of curious though. So can we just kind of run through, because we think about child marriage, we're like, there's no way that this would happen in America. There's no way that, I don't know, this is no way. Like that's right. Something that happens in the Middle East. It doesn't happen here. Mm-hmm. So let's take a look at, what the marriage age is, and just kind of analyze this a little bit.
Yeah. Well, you can take a look at it here.
Yeah, that's great.
So everything here in pink is 16 years old, with whether it's either parental consent or a judge's consent, basically consent from the state. And then I'm not a color person, so the dark pink
like
is 17 years,
magenta.
And everything else is probably 18.
Yeah.
I think we can safely say. And we can go state by state, but I mean, it is surprising to see majority is 16. Now, I was reading through these, and a lot of them, you do have to be within 4 years, 2 to 4 years of the person. But there are some that is not required. So
what states is it not
required? Which one's not required? Oh, man, I'd have to read through. Let's see. Person over 21 can't marry someone under the age of 18. Parental consent, and after at least 2 separate council sessions. There's nothing about the age range there. Here you go. North Carolina, our home state. You can marry a person, but they can't be any more than 4 years older, and you have to have a court order.
Yeah.
So I mean, a 16-year-old can marry a 20-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to give an opinion here. And this is just my opinion. I feel like
Here's West Virginia for you.
West Virginia.
Below 16 can get married with parental consent and judicial approval.
And you also have Wyoming.
Wyoming is also in there too.
As well.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like at least, I don't know, I might eat my words after I say this, but I'm going to say it and then get the backlash and just let it come at me like a wave.
Here we go.
I just feel like, because when I was 16, I had a lot of like older guys interested in me, and I didn't personally, as a 16-year-old, I didn't see 100% the problem, but anyone that I told, they were like, whoa, what's going on there? Like, that's a little bit weird. Like, why is a 20-year-old, interested in a teenager? And maybe back in the day, 20-year-olds and 16-year-olds had a lot more responsibility and there's more things going on. Like, I've heard of a lot of people when they, our grandparents, getting married really young.
Yep.
And it didn't seem, I don't know, I wasn't born during that time. It didn't seem as much of a big deal, but now it is, because there's just kind of this culture change. So, and now that I'm not 16 anymore and I'm 25, I now see exactly what they're saying, where it's like, oh, yeah, that is kind of weird. Like, you can barely drive. And
I mean, you could also approach it from a life expectancy as well. People didn't used to live into their 70s and 80s with modern medicine and technology. So you did get married earlier.
Right.
If you're only going to make it to like 50, 55, by the time you're 25, your life's half over.
Yeah.
For us, it's not even half.
Right. No, I think that's a good point.
So, I mean, you think about Little House on the Prairie days, you want to go back to like Bible times, stuff like that. When you were 12 to 15 years old, your life was half over. You are halfway grown.
Yeah.
You weren't expected to live that long back then.
Right. No, and I think it's a good point, along with the cultural aspect.
Yeah, cultural aspect has a huge part to play. And I mean, even in our lifetime, we've seen, we've seen things change from when our parents were younger. Most people were getting married probably between 18 and 21, maybe 17 and 21, and early 20s, mid 20s, and now people are waiting, late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah.
Maybe even mid 30s for marriage.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I struggle with here, is because I get your thoughts on this, because you and I would probably you and I might have differing views on this, where I'm a big proponent of young marriage, and by young marriage I mean like legally adult, 18 and up is my thing. I do think it is incredibly creepy if you're like an 18-year-old marrying like a 30-year-old. That's really gross. But I'm talking about
there's also a big difference between an 18-year-old
right
and 30-year-old. I mean, there's a big difference between an 18-year-old and a 24-year-old, and that's talking 6 years. But you move that gap further down, and you're talking about a 30-year-old and 36-year-old. Don't care. Doesn't
matter.
Yeah.
Right. Precisely. But maybe I should clarify. When I say young marriage, I mean like the two of them are young together.
Right.
That's what I mean. But I get conflicted because I look at our culture and I look at these 18-year-olds. I feel so bad for even saying it, where I'm like, they are not capable. They are not capable. They are not ready. Where I'm like, I want to be about young marriage, but I look at what's been produced and I'm like,
maybe not.
Maybe you should wait. I don't know. But like, and then at the same time, like, well, maybe that's how you learn, is, by screwing up together. I don't know. I'm conflicted.
I mean, there's something to be said for having a solid marriage partner going through college with you, when you're poor and life's rough and you're just spending your time between college and work and sleep, and that's pretty much all you've got. You've got a support system
right
built in the way of a spouse, likely you're going to be supporting them as well. I would say I used to be a proponent for it, but given the cultural shift, I'm probably not anymore. I wouldn't say I'm not in favor of it, more like I would treat it as the exception rather than the norm. Like, it's great if you're together enough, or find that person that you work really well with early on and you can move through it. But I would say most people are not going to be that.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Unfortunately, I say unfortunately because I don't want that to be the case. Like, I want it to be the case that,
because even though women, I mean, a lot of this, I'd bring down again. What's your age? Your life expectancy, but women still have a hard stop for when they can produce children. And part of the reason of getting married, one of the main reasons of getting married, is to have a family, and that countdown hits sooner.
Well, this is part of the cultural shift, is that the culture wouldn't even say that anymore.
No, they wouldn't say that.
They say marriage is about you,
mm-hmm.
where kids, like, really just, they can come into the equation or they cannot come into the equation, which is kind of like one of the episodes that we did on Dinks, talking about how people, even in their marriages, become self-absorbed. They live for themselves,
mm-hmm.
So to speak. But yeah, I'm really heartbroken at the situation that we have with, marriages, and we come back to the age of consent.
Yeah.
Which there's age of consent, and then there's also age to marry.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a little different from what I know. I was actually listening to a podcast the other day. This woman was having a situation where I think she met her boyfriend, her sister met her boyfriend when she was like 17, and the guy was like 50.
Mm-hmm.
And he was clearly grooming her, and but they couldn't, because of the state, they couldn't do anything. And that's not the issue. If you have it, this is why I'm saying, not just getting into marriage, but getting into the idea of consent. If you have a 16-year-old who can consent in a state, and you have, a 50-year-old, 60-year-old guy, or it could go the other way, I know that, but this is the more likely scenario, of grooming her, there's technically nothing that can be done because it's legally allowed.
Right.
And so that moves beyond the marriage part, and that's scary enough, but the age of consent being 16, that scares me.
That's where these bills kind of have to wrap all three in one. So you have to look at, age of consent for marriage, and then age of consent in general. And then on top of that, the distance and age between the individuals.
Yeah.
And I feel like if any of these bills only address one and neglect the other, it's not a safety, because I don't think you could have age of consent, or you couldn't have marriage lower than age of consent. Like, you couldn't have marriage allowed at 16, but age of consent's 18. It doesn't make sense. They've got to couple together.
Exactly. These two issues run together. And I'm glad that you brought this up, because I feel like this is something that's going under the radar.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that it's important, and you have a lot of people who are taking advantage of that. This is a little bit off the beaten path, but this goes into the topic here about people. Most of them are men, very sick men, taking advantage of children. There was the Instagram kind of bombshell, which shouldn't have been a bombshell. And there's an article by Fox, and yes, there's plenty of other news outlets that have covered this. In fact, I believe the Wall Street Journal actually covered this first, but MSN did. You can find it anywhere. They all say about the same thing. How Instagram's algorithms, and this is according to the article, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, that kind of connects pedophiles to underage content. And you can kind of do this with different hashtags, which I don't even want to even say what they are. They're so disgusting.
We don't need to give anything to those.
Yeah. And then, you can look at different content, or even for enough money, someone can be brought to you. And so it's really, really disgusting stuff. And so all that to say, this shouldn't surprise any of us that this is happening. This should be something that's on our radar as well. Especially if you're a conservative, and you're looking at, these different Republican candidates, I think this is a good question to ask them, along with their, transgender viewpoints for children and adults as well. So I'm really glad that you brought this up, because it brings out a side of some Republicans that needs to be exposed.
I wouldn't be surprised if we get some comments that are correcting us and saying they're rhinos, Republican in name only. I
don't care.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Care. No, I don't care.
It just shows that you shouldn't just be agreeing with your faction wholeheartedly, because they can get stuff wrong. They do get things wrong. This is one of them.
Yeah, and I think it's perfectly within our right as just American citizens and having a brain of our own, be like, you know what? There are some things I agree with. I agree with a lot of things on the conservative side. But there are definitely things that I don't agree with, and this one's a pretty strong one.
Yeah, and I think it comes at a dangerous time as well for anybody trying to lower that age of consent or age of marriage, or both, while the far left has been pushing for kids, autonomy, basically, to start start hormone treatment. I don't think they've opened it up to surgeries at this point. But
for minors?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that's 100% true. Even North Carolina, we even had a case where they definitely did mutilate the breasts of a 16-year-old.
Okay.
So it's happening. It's just the media is definitely hiding it. To what extent, I don't know. But even hormonal treatments, especially for girls, I can't speak as much for boys. I haven't done as much research on it. But I know that when you pump, 10 times as much testosterone as a girl's supposed to have, that's chemical issues as well.
Right.
So there's actually a picture that changed my entire viewpoint. It actually didn't change it in the sense that I flipped. It was like, it just brought to life how horrific it was. It was Jordan Peterson. It might have gotten removed on Twitter, but he retweeted a post of a girl. She had taken a picture of her bottom surgery, and they showed, I know it's graphic, but I needed to see it, of this fake penis. And it was the most horrendous thing that I had ever seen. A dead piece of flesh that had been put there. That is what the left is advocating for small children. Like it was horrendous, and it was actual. When you look at it like this, Jordan Peterson's correct. This is butchering a child.
Yeah. So to make it legal for kids to make the option, whether they do it through a hormone or through surgery, the idea of making it autonomous for kids to make a decision without their parents' discretion, California looking at you, Canada looking at you in your dumb MAID program for assisted suicide by the government, because that's who you want assisting you. It blows my mind that's even things. So when I hear about them trying to lower the age of consent, it just makes me all the more concerned that the timing is coming together, especially when pedophilia has been removed from mental illness and now they're just minor attracted persons.
Right.
You're just giving leeway to them with this type of stuff, is that they're 12. They knew they wanted to be a girl. Why can't they know who they want to be with, who they want to consent to have sex with, or who they want to marry? Right. And that's my concern in this. So, I mean, pay attention to your local elections in your state and see what they're voting for.
Yeah. And also, I will say, if you're a Democrat that's against, child marriage, good for you. But also, can you apply that same logic to transgenderism, please? That would be really, really nice.
Stop affirming everything.
Yeah, that would be great, because you guys are halfway there. You're so close. But yeah, I think that concludes this episode. I thought that was a good topic to bring up. Good thought.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Something to watch out for in the polls.
Yeah, because let's see, we have 2024 coming up.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to get into that right now. All right, so let us know what your thoughts are on the age of consent. Are we off? Are we on point? Let us know through Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or you can send us an email at residentskeptics@gmail.com, and that is all the time we have for today.
That's right. We'll see you all again next time.